I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary.
Recent headlines have painted tariffs in all kinds of ways. Trade wars, retaliations, market disruptions. Much of that framing come from Trump himself, who positioned tariffs as a tool of leverage, meant to pressure trading partners and project strength.
Breaking news to bring you on the global tariff war that was launched by Donald Trump.
President Trump announcing the 25% tax on goods coming into the U.S. from Canada and Mexico and 10% on Chinese products.
Developing story as we are hearing that President Trump has agreed to pause tariffs on Mexico.
If you're someone who sees tariffs as economic warfare, I get it. But this episode is here to look at the story from a different angle. What if there's another side to the coin? Another truth we seldom hear. Not always, but sometimes what feels like a punch is really a push. In this episode, we're going to unpack the strategy behind tariffs, the ugly, confusing, sometimes brilliant logic behind a policy most of us love to hate. We'll look at how they're used, when they work, when they fail, and why sometimes pain now might buy power later. Let's start by asking, what are tariffs really?
If you're going to build a new factory, you need to understand the policies for the next 20 years, not just the next 2 days or even 4 years.
Before it became a tech superpower, South Korea was poor, one of the poorest countries in the world after the Korean War. In the 1950s and 60s, its economy was mostly agricultural, and its GDP was just 5% of what it was in the US. And tariffs barely existed. But that didn't last. South Korea began to rise fast, and at the center of that transformation was a bold, often controversial strategy: tariffs. South Korea, under President Park Chung-hee, made a high-stakes move that would go on to define its economic future, give local companies, especially those in electronics and cars, a chance to grow by shielding them from foreign competition, at least until they were strong enough to stand on their own. In the 1970s and 80s, Samsung and LG weren't global giants yet. They were fledgling electronic firms with cheap products that barely worked. Samsung only made its first black and white TV in 1970, and their main focus was just getting these basic products into Korean homes. Meanwhile, the South Korean government was focused on something bigger, building long-term capacity, factories, training programs, and infrastructure. To back up that long-term vision, the government imposed strong tariffs on everything from Japanese TVs to US semiconductors. The goal was simple: give domestic companies just enough space to catch their breath and build momentum.
Samsung and LG Electronics are enjoying a solid presence in the US household electronics market. With state-of-the-art technology and premium products, Samsung now has the biggest market share, beating Whirlpool for the first time.
Samsung began mastering semiconductors. LG started making televisions that didn't just work, they competed, not just at home, but abroad. By the early 2000s, both Samsung and LG were exporting globally. TVs, phones, fridges, microchips. In fact, by 2000, ICs, short for integrated circuits, had become one of South Korea's top exports, right up there with cars. These are the tiny chips that power everything from phones and laptops to appliances and vehicles. From barely existing on trade maps, South Korea had become a major force in global hardware. Their journey from the 1960s to the 2000s wasn't easy. Consumers paid more. Foreign competitors pushed back. Critics warned about complacency. But the bet paid off. Samsung and LG are global electronics leaders with a stable international footprint, holding their ground even as Chinese competition intensifies. So what if the very thing we blame for economic pain was also part of the solution? A tariff is a tax, but not on you, not directly. It's a tax a country places on goods coming from abroad. Think of it like this. A $10 car part from Canada enters the US. If the tariff is 20%, the part now costs $12. Canada still gets 10, but the extra 2 goes to the US government. Tariffs can be applied as a percentage, a flat fee, or both. They are not new. Before the U.S. had an income tax, tariffs were the primary source of federal revenue. In 2024, they brought in $77 billion, just 1.6% of total government revenue. But they remain a tool presidents use to make a point.
We are collecting a lot of revenue so far, guys, $121 billion.
Most of what the U.S. trades are goods, physical items like cars, electronics, and clothing. In 2024, 80% of imports were goods, while only 20% were services, like travel or consulting. Top imports, petroleum, computers, avocados, and top exports, soybeans, almonds, and cars. Interestingly, the U.S. both imports and exports oil.
The price of imported goods are not only going down since President Trump began his new tariffs, they're actually falling faster than the price of goods overall.
Roughly 70% of imported goods enter the U.S. duty-free. The rest are hit with tariffs that vary based on trade deals, political pressure, or industry lobbying. So yes, tariffs raise money. Sometimes they protect jobs, but they can also raise prices. So are they good or bad? That's not the real question. The real question is, what are they trying to do? So when do tariffs actually work? Let's look at a few places where they changed the game.
India is going through a solar power boom. A combination of government targets and steeply falling prices have meant developers are falling over themselves to build huge new solar farms across the country.
India, for example, wanted to build its own solar manufacturing industry. The country was importing massive quantities of cheap solar panels from China. Good for prices, bad for local industry.
They are facing competition from across the border in China, where manufacturers are selling their goods off very cheaply because they've simply made too much for their own domestic market.
So the government stepped in. It introduced tariffs on imported panels, gave subsidies to local firms, and put its full weight behind building a domestic clean energy base. These subsidies helped lower production costs at home, while tariffs raised the price of imports, giving local companies a real chance to grow. Brazil took a similar route with Embraer, now one of the world's leading aircraft manufacturers. The company didn't start with fancy tech or huge factories. It started with a protective bubble.
Most of Embraer's initial contracts were with the Brazilian government, which supported its growth over the first 20 years.
The government shielded it from bigger players while investing in education and research and development. It gave Embraer time. And in a free market world where speed is king and patience is scarce, that time turned out to be one of the most valuable advantages they had. And in the US, There's the steel story. Steel is always political.
President Trump is responding to an industry that has suffered from surges of dirt cheap steel from foreign imports.
In 2018, Trump introduced sweeping tariffs on imported steel and aluminum. The goal: protect American steel workers and revive a fading industry. Critics pointed out that it raised prices downstream: cars, construction, appliances. But supporters say it worked. At least in part, some mills restarted. Jobs were saved. Domestic production increased. Was it perfect? No, but it bought time. And sometimes that's enough.
Small increase on prices, but a major effect on taking those imports down.
Tariffs don't build industries on their own, but they create breathing room. And if that time is used well with smart investments, education, and long-term planning, they can change a country's future. But there are also plenty of stories where tariffs went wrong, where the plan didn't land, the costs piled up, and the payoff never came.
So in theory, that sounds great.
But there's an issue.
The problem is that Argentina still has a lot of these old protectionist measures, a very strong power from the unions. So for example, today, the local manufacturers are not allowing the import of these shales and of these rigs, and it's delaying the development of all of that.
Take Argentina. For decades, the government used tariffs to shield its electronics sector. The idea was to build national strength in tech manufacturing. But with little accountability and weak innovation, many local firms fell behind. Consumers ended up paying more for products that couldn't match global standards. Jobs may have been preserved, but the progress wasn't sustainable.
The political overlay and operational overlay made the rating agencies not doing it, and that's being the problem. There's still some blockage to bring capital, to bring rigs, to bring the developments in Argentina.
Nigeria followed a similar pattern. High tariffs on rice and cement were supposed to encourage domestic production. Instead, it fueled smuggling and black markets. A few powerful companies benefited. Every day, Nigerians paid more.
Government's policy and immediate action in reducing the price of input for smallholder farmers.
Tariffs can protect, but they can also isolate. They can start wars, raise prices, confuse markets, and shake global trust. Here's where it gets more personal. Tariffs aren't just economic tools, they're emotional ones. To some voters, a tariff says we're finally standing up for ourselves. To others, it's like a symbol of self-sabotage, but either way, it hits a nerve. When Trump talked tariffs, he wasn't just talking trade. He was talking about fairness, about lost jobs, about global systems that felt rigged, and for millions of Americans, that message landed. Tariffs became a way of drawing a line and saying enough.
Bottom line is, like tariffs in theory, hate them in practice, and 57% of voters now say that they believe that tariffs hurt the economy.
This isn't new. Tariffs have always been political. They are part of presidential campaigns, late-night debates, dinner table arguments, because they represent something bigger: control, identity, even dignity.
I'm very optimistic, and I agree.
You're optimistic?
I am. I'm extremely optimistic.
Optimistic? Not the word some might use to describe their outlook on the economy, given all the back and forth with tariffs.
And yes, sometimes they're chaos. Trump's approach was unpredictable. Announce, reverse, threaten again. But that unpredictability was part of the spectacle. To some, it looked like leadership. To others, it looked like chaos theory. Either way, tariffs became theater and the stage, global economics.
Tariffs are going to make us rich as hell. It's going to bring our country's businesses back that left us.
Maybe the real question isn't whether tariffs are good or bad. Maybe it's whether we're willing to sit with discomfort long enough to build something stronger. Because yes, tariffs can be blunt, they can be weaponized, they can backfire, but they can also buy time. They can carve out space, they can give countries the opportunity to reset the terms of engagement. And in a world dominated by speed, fast trade, fast decision, fast feedback, maybe the most radical move is slowing down, taking a hit now to build strength for later. So the next time someone says tariffs are a mistake, maybe it's worth asking, mistake for who and a turning point for what? Thanks for watching.